Tanya, are you ready to go?
I am.
Okay, great. I will admit our public participants and we can get started.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Hey, good evening, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started with the disclaimer information. Brandon, if you wouldn't mind walking through that with regard to our alternative arrangements during times of COVID.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire speaking. I'll go over the modified meeting procedures and guidelines. These are to ensure that the COVID-19 provisions of the Kansas Open Meeting Act are met for this meeting. Board members and other meeting participants must state their names and titles each time they speak. Various members of city staff are present via Zoom and in person in attendance. We must also state our names and our titles each time we speak. All motions will need to be stated clearly, and after a motion is made and seconded, the chair will call on board members individually to provide their vote. The chair will then announce whether or not the motion carried, as well as a count of the vote. The agenda for this meeting provided instructions for how to submit public comments and how they would be handled. Written public comments should have been received by the posted deadline. We did not receive written public comment, but we did receive requests for public comment this evening, and we have 2 members of the public who would like to speak. The chair will call for in-person public comment for those without access to technology options, and they would be here in attendance. If we do receive any members of the public attending us here in person, then I will notify you, Madam Chair. Finally, I want to remind everyone to please mute yourselves when you are not speaking.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much. Okay, we'll move to agenda item A, approve the minutes. Do I hear a motion?
Make a motion. Sanjay Mishra, member board.
Sanjay is making the motion to accept the minutes. Is there a second?
Board Member Stephanie Littleton, I second that motion.
Thank you, Stephanie. All those in favor signify with a yay or a nay. Sanjay?
Yeah.
Bill?
Bill is out this evening, Tanya.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Marie?
So I don't find a copy of the minutes in the agenda packet. Did I not, am I looking in the right spot? Or were they posted in a previous agenda?
In the agenda packet?
I don't see them there either. Madam Chair, this is Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. They were posted at one time, but apparently they are not linked at the moment.
I don't see the link. Yeah.
Previous, the initial one.
They were there earlier, so. Yeah.
They were. Yeah.
Again, Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire, I would suggest that we defer this item until the next meeting, and we will post the minutes on the next agenda. I apologize for the confusion about that.
Okay, very good then. Is there a motion to withdraw?
Motion to withdraw.
Okay, is there a second?
This Board Member Stephanie Littleton, I'll withdraw mine as well.
Okay, all those in favor signify with a yay or a nay. Sanjay?
Yeah.
Marie?
Yay.
Jenny?
Yay.
Jane? Is Jane still at another meeting?
Yes, she is.
Okay, perfect, thanks. Stephanie?
Yay.
And Tanya, yay. So we've got 5 yays, so the majority rules, and that motion passes. Okay, the next item on the agenda is B, public comments. Vice Chair Littleton, I'd like to turn it over to you at this point, and if you'll please read the comments on the agenda.
Madam Vice Chair,
Yes.
this is Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. I want to apologize because at the beginning of the meeting, I stated we had not received written correspondence, but we have in fact received written correspondence, and it is attached to the agenda.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much for clarifying that. Okay. And Stephanie, that would be the shaded area on the agenda.
This board member, Stephanie Littleton. Brandon, are you referring to separate from the public comment? There's some attachments.
Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. Under the general public comment, section B on our agenda, we have posted communications that we received for general public comment. And then in addition to that, Mr. Nally and Mr. Watts are signed up to provide verbal public comment.
Very well. This board member, Stephanie Littleton, I can acknowledge, I'm aware that Mr. Watts has submitted written correspondence. Appreciate that, Mr. Watts. Subject on Department of Police civil servant-owned consultant. And if there's any additional, I'm not aware of it. I think there was something actually submitted later, maybe today, but I don't have a copy of that. But I would like to go ahead and move forward and just give some talking points for public comment so we can allow both to have an opportunity to speak. So I'd start with, the public is allowed to speak at public comment after first being recognized by the chair or the vice chair, except that any complaints or comments regarding individually identifiable officers are not allowed. Rather, any such comments or complaints may be provided to the board in writing, and the board will forward such comment or complaint to the appropriate person within the Lawrence Police Department. The board may establish reasonable limitations on the allowable length of public comment. As a general practice, the board will not discuss or debate these items, nor will it make decisions on items presented during this time. Just to add a few additional points, the public is allowed to speak at any items or issues except those scheduled for discussion on the agenda. Individuals wishing to provide live public comment must register as outlined at the top of the agenda, and public comment is limited to 3 minutes. So at this time, I would like to go ahead and ask if Mr. Nally, I understand, would like to speak. So Mr. Nally, you have 3 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Jared Nally, community member. I'm addressing the board tonight to offer suggestions and comments. I would suggest that the board motion to include expanded guidelines on the revision of the board's ordinance to provide common citizens like myself with directions to properly file complaints against the Community Police Review Board itself. This is a suggestion based on Board Member Marie Taylor's input that the bylaws did not provide myself with direction to file a complaint. Related to this, I would like to apologize for incorrectly using the communications section of these meetings to try and file a complaint with the board, and thank Board Members Marie Taylor and the City Attorney Tony Wheeler for providing me limited insight on how to file a complaint. Following this, my second suggestion is that the board motion to assign a board member to follow up with myself, or motion to have the city manager's office follow up with myself on a detailed process for filing an ethics complaint against a board member. I took the City Attorney Wheeler's advice to address my complaint to the city manager and provided a complaint on October 9th, which the city manager's office has not followed up with me on. And I would like information on how the process works, when I should hear back, and how investigation into my complaint will take place. I'd also like to make public the fact that after my complaint to the city manager, Haskell Indian Nations University President Ronald Graham issued a directive imposing sanctions on me for my attempts to file a complaint, in which he flaunted his connections with the city mayor and specifically the city manager's office, which I hope is not a reason my complaint has not moved forward. And I also hope that I would receive the same access to filing a complaint, and that the complaint would follow the same investigative process, regardless of who was implicated by the complaint. Additionally, community member Mr. Watts reached out to me and made me aware that when adapting a letter template I developed for the student newspaper, I had missed removing the footer, which incorrectly reflected the involvement of the Indian Leader, Haskell Indian Nations University student newspaper, and my complaints and comments do not represent this publication and are only my own. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nally. Right. Next, I'm going to go ahead and open up the floor. Mr. Watts, you have 3 minutes if you'd like to go ahead. Mr. Watts, you're on mute.
Thank you. Well, there are a couple of things going on here. The first one is last night, the consultant was approved for this police review board process, and that report won't be completed until July. So there's really no point in this board being in any type of a hurry to do anything. With respect to rushing, and I've noticed that there's been some rushing going on as Ms. Taylor has introduced some alternative thoughts and some board-generated legal stuff instead of taking it from the city's legal team. The city's legal team is not here to support the people of Lawrence. It's here to make sure that the city lasts forever and ever, amen, whatever that means. This same city team, I mean, the same process is what ensured segregation here in Lawrence. The city executive team did it to make sure that they moved on. Okay, well, this police review board is an industry process. It is the consultant that has been selected is going to be a private venture capitalist operation, a nonprofit, a for-profit outfit. As noted in the correspondence I sent to you, the primary consultant is from Manhattan, Kansas. The secondary consultant that I sent to the last piece on has a history of saying, well, the only way that we're going to fix the police department is to increase more people. So we're going to see in June or July, we're going to fix the Lawrence police by having more police people. I don't think so. I mean, what do I know? It's what they're going to do. Last night, $200,000 was allocated to the police, $100,000 for new fancy tasers, and another $100,000 for this consultant. There was a consultant that was done 2.5 years ago, and the report was buried. What are we fishing for? We already know what the problem is. Okay, here we're going further. And Mr. McKinley was a part of this one because as we move forward, here's a quote out of the newspaper. Most disturbing to the court in acquitting Mr. Charges was the clear discrepancy between what the officers wrote in their reports compared to what they discussed among themselves on their own surveillance cameras. If the police can set it up with each other and say, look, you put in the report that he shoved you. He may not have, but just put it in there. What else can they do? And the internal review said there's no problem. Who are we supposed to trust? Who do I take a complaint to that I don't like the internal review process? How do we do this? This board is all that's left. The town commission is waiting for you. You have not opined on 8 can't wait. That's basically gone. The police have made sure that this is run into the ground and time after time after time until the energy's gone. Okay, that's really all I have to say. I'm going to watch to see what happens tonight in relation to the restrictions because there is more written about who cannot be on this board and who can be on it. Let's see what else you guys are going to do. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Watts. Appreciate it. Great. Tanya, if you don't mind, I'll let you take over from here on the agenda.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Stephanie. This is Tanya, Chair Salvini. We're going to go ahead and move to the agenda items. We'll go with C. Number 1, continue training on bias-based policing. So we'll go ahead and start that.
That's my part in the meeting, correct? We're going to continue our training on comprehensive plan to achieve fair and impartial policing. And I go ahead and introduce myself again, Kate Carter. I'm a Deputy Attorney General in Attorney General Derek Schmidt's office. And I've done this training with other community advisory boards, and I've also participated in training law enforcement officers in fair and impartial policing. I wanted to start out just asking if there were any questions from our last session, because we're going to jump back in the middle here, and I didn't know if there were any questions, thoughts about what we've already discussed. Yes, Sanjay.
Sanjay Mishra, board member. So let me just confirm what I heard last time, that implicit bias training works.
Research has shown that training consistent with what we've talked about can reduce unconscious bias, implicit bias in people, yes. Now, there are lots of questions, of course, that come with that. You know, how long does it last? And is it just with race? But the research has been done specifically with race, and it has reduced the bias in study participants. Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, we'll jump back in if I can get my screen pulled up. And we're going to start talking about data collection. Can you see that screen?
We cannot see it yet.
Okay. Let me come back here.
We can see it now.
There, that's better. Right, you can see that big?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. So the next section that we're going to discuss is data collection. And when we're talking about data collection, there are numerous considerations. And I want to look at some of the considerations in using data collection. And we're going to use an actual case study, an occurrence, kind of delving into some data collection in a specific instance. So the San Francisco Chronicle prepared an article charging racial disparity in law enforcement practices in their city. And you can see on the screen there, what that is showing is African-American felony arrest rates per 1,000 people compared to 7 other cities. So you see San Francisco is just by far a much higher rate than Oakland, San Diego, Los Angeles, San Jose, Fresno, Long Beach, and Sacramento. So just looking at this, we see clearly substantial disparity. Now, in all 8 cities, the African-American arrest rates are disproportionate to their representation in the residential populations. And what would the reason for that be? There can be lots of reasons. And that's what comes back to data collection and how you collect it and how you compare it. And so we're going to walk into that. But it begins the revelation that data collection in and of itself is a really sticky problem. And starting out with data collection, deciding what we measure, it starts getting sticky immediately, but figuring out exactly what it's telling us is also difficult. So what should we compare arrest rates to? We talked about it's just proportionate to population. Maybe it should be compared to the level of traffic. What are the traffic patterns in that city? And would that justify some disproportional representation? What about employment patterns in the region or the city? So there are lots of ways at looking at the data that you collect. So this article did get published, and San Francisco Police Department responds, as you see there. We arrest for behavior, not for race. We use aggressive crime-focused control programs, not race-based programs. And one consideration is those that we arrest are less likely to go to prison. And I think part of the logic is there, and they end up back on the streets being rearrested. So as we look at this, we're going to see that the theme is it's easy to measure disparity, but it's difficult to identify or isolate the causes of it. So we have the Chronicle article. They can't prove racial bias policing. On the other hand, the police department can't disprove it. So one of the things that they brought up, that arrestees are less likely to go to prison, turns out to be statistically correct. And in fact, San Francisco felony arrestees are charged at a lower rate than those other cities. So police are making the arrest, take them into jail, but the charge doesn't get filed against them compared to the other cities, lower charging rate. And if they are charged, it doesn't go to trial. They aren't prosecuted at the same rate as the other cities. And if it does go to trial in San Francisco, it's a lower conviction rate. And if they do get convicted, it's a lower sentence that's imposed. Not just shorter, but it's served in the local jail, not in the prison. So more of the arrestees are back on the street, and perhaps this then makes San Francisco itself a more attractive place to commit a crime. In looking at this, I want to mention a tool that could be put in place that could help with the issue of racial disparity in arrests, but it's targeted with these issues of the lower charging rate, lower prosecution rate, and maybe even the lower conviction rate. And that's a screening process within the department. Evaluate the case in an objective, methodical manner. And that could have happened at any point. You know, why are they being charged at a lower rate? Are those arrests determined later to be inappropriate arrests? They didn't really have probable cause. Why aren't those cases taken to trial? Did they determine that even at charging point, there wasn't enough evidence looking back at it, you know, in a more objective light? So if they could set up a system here, a screening process at each level that has some fairly objective standards, I think that's one tool at each level that could be put in place. So this is the ratio of prison admissions compared to felony arrests. And you see that San Francisco has 3.9 per 100 adult felony arrests that actually go to prison. So that almost turns that other table we saw on its head. So they end up with more repeat arrests and with more out-of-town criminals, which means you can't really compare it to the population because that's not a proportional comparison. Another San Francisco PD response was, we have aggressive focused crime fighting. They say the communities and the neighborhoods are calling for us to come in and stop the crime and violence. Another fact, these are all felony arrests, not just African Americans. So these are felony arrests per 1,000, which the other graph was as well. And you can see that San Francisco is higher than all but 2 of the other cities in its overall arrest rate. So perhaps this is what the demographic should be compared to. The San Francisco Chronicle published the fact that Black people in San Francisco are arrested for felonies at 4 times the rate in Oakland. Well, it turns out that non-Black people in San Francisco are arrested for felonies at 2.5 times the rate in Oakland. Now, that's not reflected in this graph, but that's non-Black people. It doesn't explain away the disparity, but it helps us understand the difficulty in interpreting, and it also gives us more context. And ultimately, that's the lesson that I hope we come away with, that it's easy to perhaps put in data collection measures, but we need to understand what is it we're truly measuring. And maybe it's not as easy in the long run. Easy to show disparity, hard to show what causes it. So while data collection can convey a commitment to accountability, and it does convey to citizens a desire and intention to address disparities, as we see here, there is a downside. It's costly in terms of money. It's costly in terms of police staffing. And it doesn't define your disparities, and it doesn't reveal your causes. When you start talking about data collection, if you're creating it for yourself, the city itself, you're going to be talking, hiring a consultant just for data collection. You're probably going to be buying software. You're going to be looking at quality control. People cost, officers filling out forms costs, supervisors reviewing forms costs, data input and quality control. So census and crime and vehicle stop data can identify the disparities, but it can't tell us whether racial bias is the reason for those disparate patterns. It's a deeper problem that is more complicated than that. So we end up in the same place, that the Chronicle can't prove racial bias, but the police department can't disprove it either. Another problem with data collection is it can easily be misused and misinterpreted. It can be damaging to the morale of officers and of the agency. And it can result in depolicing. So what can we measure? Excuse me. We can show whether people of color are stopped disproportionate to their representation in some comparison population, but who decides what that is and if it's relevant. So the comparison data is your benchmark. It could be raw or adjusted census data. It could be DMV data, your licensed drivers. It could be blind enforcement mechanisms. It could be mere human observation data. It could be accident data. So choosing your benchmark is kind of your first step. There's no one best benchmark. They all have strengths and they all have weaknesses. Again, disparity is not the same as police bias. Proponents say even if we can't measure racial bias with these data, they produce important information that an agency should have about line personnel activities. Detractors say perhaps, but there should be a cost-benefit analysis. These are some resources, and I can provide these if there's interest to Lieutenant Ernst. That breaks all of this down to a greater degree, what different benchmarks can be used, how they can be utilized. So data collection, I think I mentioned earlier, is brought up in the legislature, as far as I know, still every year. I know it was when I was more active in these trainings, that there are certain advocates, groups advocating for data collection, and it may well ultimately pass. The thing is, it is a complicated subject that should be well considered before you just jump in and think that it can be defined just by a few numbers and locations. Any questions or comments about data collection? Yes, Sanjay.
Sanjay Mishra, board member. So as I look through the slides and you talked about them, I got the impression that data collection is costly in terms of people and dollars also.
Yes.
Based on your experience, would you be able to quantify what this cost is per person per dollar? So if we're looking at 10 pieces of information, what's the cost?
I do not know that. I am sure that there is now much more data out now than even the resources that I had up on the screen there. There would be some information in these, but I'm sure that there is further research because a lot of cities did institute it. At one time, Wichita had data collection in place, but I don't think that they've continued that. So, you know, cities like that could make a pure cost comparison. You know, how much did it cost us on a population basis? This is actually the last element of a comprehensive plan. It's implementing a policing style that promotes positive interactions between the law enforcement community and the diverse communities of the jurisdiction. And I specifically want to address community outreach with this goal in mind. So agencies engage in ongoing efforts to strengthen those relationships. And that is a critical piece to fair and impartial policing. Building it into the comprehensive plan ensures that efforts are intentional and consistent, not accidental and sporadic. When we talk about objectives, these are going to appear somewhat circular. They're going to show up in a lot of different areas. And it's because they feed off each other, each enhancing and making up a part of the other. So our key objectives with community outreach are to develop trust and confidence, and that's mutual, goes both directions. Law enforcement to community, community to law enforcement. To reduce the perceptions of racial or other bias-based policing, and to collaborate to promote fair and impartial policing. So here are some ideas in developing trust and confidence. You can have special community initiatives that are sponsored by law enforcement. They can be targeted. You can have citizen groups, you can have interactive educational opportunities, satisfaction surveys. And you'll find if you work on a comprehensive plan that the comprehensive plan in itself can develop trust and confidence, particularly depending on how you develop it, how much you pull your community into the development of the comprehensive plan. So some of the things that would fall under this might be midnight basketball, law enforcement officers at youth centers volunteering and assisting, having focus groups, listening tours where the agency can ask what's good, what's bad, what can we do, what can you, the community, do to help us achieve the goal. Some law enforcement agencies have offered personal safety seminars, particularly self-defense for women, that kind of thing. You can set up information exchanges. Now this works, we talked about this working both ways. It helps residents stop profiling police based on bad experiences that they may have had, family members may have had. So encouraging residents to greet law enforcement officers, engaging them in conversations. Hopefully encouraging information sharing both directions. Welcoming concerns about the police department is critical to this. Residents could work with the department to honor or acknowledge good policing in their own neighborhoods. And residents could assist in orienting new recruits in different neighborhoods. Anything that's done in this vein is a long-term project. This requires long-term commitment and consistent effort. The next objective, reducing the perception of bias. Trust development activities, dialogue opportunities, some of the same things we talked about, achieving another objective. Department diversity racial diversity, gender diversity, can reduce the perception of bias. It increases the agency's language and cultural competencies. And the contact theory, again, works here. The positive interaction between diverse populations can mold perceptions and reduce biases. So you're reducing biases within your own department by having that diversity. Increasing interpersonal skills for the officers does a lot to reduce bias. Transparency, whether it's a police review board or civilian advisory board, that can be helpful. And outreach to immigrant communities can also reduce the perception of bias. So some of the practical ideas that could fit into this objective are participating in community festivals, particularly if they are ethnically specific, crime prevention gatherings, perhaps law enforcement agency sponsoring engraving valuables for residents, hosting block meetings, sponsoring athletic teams and leagues, mentoring programs and cleanup projects, participating in community gardening, providing tutoring. Immigrant outreach can be an important piece of this. Providing language training for your officers can be very helpful. Having liaison positions for specific immigrant communities. Inviting representatives of specific communities to share cultural information within the department. So there are lots of ways to achieve this. The next objective, collaborating to promote fair and impartial policing. Involving the minorities in your community in developing of the plan can do that. Involving minorities in the implementation of your plan can do that. Setting up task forces can do that. Using that as a forum to exchange information. It's important to include your law enforcement agency at all levels, including patrol, including executives. It shows a commitment by the agency. And in some cases, what needs to happen is a certain level of ceding power. For instance, if you have a task force that is co-chaired by a law enforcement officer and a community member, a leader in a certain neighborhood, whoever is leading that task force. For the law enforcement officer to cede power to run that task force or recruit new members, that shows a lot of trust coming from law enforcement to the community. And it can be very effective to cede some of the power and authority that the law enforcement agent holds to the community member. So promoting positive interaction is, again, another means of community outreach. Again, using our contact theory, relying on that to assist us. Community immersion programs can be an important tool here. You can, when an agency is hiring new recruits, there can be some inquiry into the new recruit's level of experience and interaction with diverse communities. And that can be helpful later when you're looking at community immersion programs. And interaction with new populations, seeking out that interaction, not just hoping for positive accidental interaction. So targeting opportunities to expose officers to populations with which they have had little previous contact is also encouraged for this objective. But what is critical is accountability, specific goals, objectives, and actions. And I mentioned long-term progress, but you also have to have short-term progress so that people keep the faith. If they can't see things moving forward, don't see new events coming along, that they will lose interest, they will lose trust in that it's a long-term commitment. So you've got both values there, short-term progress and long-term progress that are important in community outreach. So I went through that maybe too quickly. Does anybody want to talk a little bit more about community outreach or have any questions about that? So those.
This board member, Marie Taylor, I have a question.
Sure.
And maybe it's actually going to lead more into your other slide, but what communities have these comprehensive plans? And I don't think Lawrence's does, right? Is that what you've told us before?
They don't have a comprehensive plan modeled after this. No, no, they don't.
Do you know?
By my understanding.
Okay. Do you know which communities in Kansas do that we could look for as a guide to kind of see how it all is laid out?
I could get you that information. It is a major undertaking, but I can get you that information. I know the communities that I've trained, but since I'm not in that position anymore, I've not followed them since the training. But I can get that information back to Lieutenant Ernst.
Great, thank you.
So we've made it through the elements of a comprehensive plan, those being having a policy prohibiting racial or other bias-based policing, recruitment and hiring, training and education, leadership, supervision, accountability, the measurement, and policing style. So the next thing we want to think about is how do we build it and how do we make it work? So mostly we have a lot of questions here, but they're the questions that you need to explore if you're going to do this, to how to move forward. So who do we want involved? We want lots of diversity of perspective. This board represents diversity in Lawrence. Does it sufficiently represent it? Would we want to bring in greater diversity? And how would we identify that? And how would we go about doing that? And when we're working on a comprehensive plan, who represents the department? Is the department represented at all levels, or is it just executives participating? Because this is going to be important at all levels. How do you draw them in? How do you determine the leadership? So there may be different degrees of participation, those that are actually at the table, those that are in the community that are offering observations and suggestions. Do you want to start out with focus groups? Do you want a listening tour? And how are you going to head up the project? Is it going to have co-leads between civilian and law enforcement? There does have to be a key person who will keep things on track. You may want to break the project into pieces and have different key leaders for different elements, whether you broke it out into each of the elements that we walked through before. But there still should be one leader that monitors each of those leaders if you've broken it into pieces.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
Board member, what you're describing, I mean, I think it's great for us to hear this information to kind of know what other communities are doing or what is advocated at the state level. But it seems like part of this has to come from administration and also buy-in from the law enforcement agency itself, because it seems like this is establishing a plan and implementing a plan. It all seems like it's an administrative function for the city.
Well, they certainly provide the framework. You know, you have paid personnel who can do the paperwork and set up the meetings and, you know, all of those nuts and bolts things. So yes, your agency has to make the commitment if this is going to happen.
Right, and it seems like our board is one of the facets of community outreach.
I think that's what that appears to me to be true. Yes.
Okay, so like we're not necessarily driving the process. We are a participant as well.
I see that you are, and I don't know a lot about how the board was set up and what the function of the board is, what's written into, you know, the city ordinance or whatever, into city ordinance. But if the agency has a commitment, they can rely on the police review board to work with them to further it. But maybe the police review board is just a piece of that can help drive it. And we draw from other parts of the community to make this move forward. But I think you're definitely right. You need the commitment of the agency.
Thank you.
Sure.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes.
This is Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. Board Member Taylor, those are very good questions. Very insightful and sort of get at issues of our form of government a little bit. And I just wanted to take the opportunity to say that you know, where the board works is really in the policy realm, not so much the administrative realm, which is where Lieutenant Ernst and I work and Captain McKinley. And so, you know, the three of us as well as any of the city management and staff, you know, we are here to serve and be responsive to the policy direction that comes from the city commission. And the board is certainly a part of that process, a key component of that process. And so, you know, this is the sort of thing that I could see if there was policy direction to, you know, as recommended by the board and then as directed by the city commission to develop a comprehensive bias-based policing comprehensive plan, then that's something that the staff would be compelled to be responsive to. I just wanted to take the opportunity to do a little city government 101. So.
Thank you, Brandon.
This is a board member, Stephanie Bolton. I just want to give great questions, very in conversation with Kate Carter, just to give a little bit of kind of background on kind of bringing Kate to this, to our meeting for the education. I think it was the first year that our board learned, maybe in the first 6 months, that a comprehensive bias-based plan existed. And I apologize to Lieutenant Ernst, but I've kind of stayed on that for the last 2 years, asking for information and kind of did some homework to find that we don't have that, but I wanted us to all kind of get exposed to it. So I really appreciate that Kate's given this presentation, and Marie, you're asking great questions, because we're all in this together to kind of get this exposure and see, this is something that's, is this for us? And for all of us, obviously, there's all kinds of different pieces to this, right? So anyway, but thank you. Thanks, everyone.
The one thing to always be conscious of is, what's your overarching goal by everything we tackle here, whether it's how we're recruiting, how we're training, how we do community outreach. Your overarching goal is to achieve unbiased policing. And you're doing it working with the community. So you wonder, why adopt a comprehensive plan? Here are reasons: means to address perceptions of bias, a symbol of commitment. Bias is a long-standing problem. This is a long-term tool to address it. There are cities in which they weren't called comprehensive plans, but where frameworks were imposed on them by courts. And so here is a means to choose to take on a framework that would achieve unbiased policing, and because it's the right thing to do. It has the potential to improve community relations to an inestimable effect. It can also assist in reducing crime. So that is the information that I have, and I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'm grateful that you invited me. This, as I said, this was one of my favorite things to do, is the trainings. It's made harder by Zoom, but I am grateful that to have been invited and participated in your meeting.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you being here. This is Chair Salvini. I do have a question. You stated at the end, assisting in reducing crime. So I'm guessing there's some data that's been gathered on programs that have been successful with this. And I don't want to make assumptions about it, but if you could give a few examples of the correlation between the program effect in reducing crime.
Well, what I can give you is really theoretical. I will have to get you more information to tell you how it correlates statistically. But if you have a trusting relationship between your law enforcement and your community, you have community members that are more trusting in working with law enforcement, reporting to law enforcement, assisting law enforcement in keeping their community safe. And that can be especially difficult in some of the immigrant communities where they've come from countries where law enforcement was the last last person you wanted to talk to, that you had most fear of. So what I can offer, as I say, is theoretical. I will get information and I will get it to Lieutenant Ernst.
Thank you.
Sure. If there aren't any other questions.
So
Yes,
I,
Sanjay.
Sanjay Mishra, board member. I would presume that we'll have copies of your slides, right? Is that fair, Brandon?
I did send an initial one. An
That's
initial
okay.
draft, but I can send the final draft that we used tonight and make sure that you have that.
Thank you.
Actually, briefly, this is Lieutenant David Ernst. Kate, you had sent me some slides or whatever a couple
weeks ago. You had made reference that that was a draft. If you know that you have not modified those or adjusted those, we can then just distribute them from there, whatever's easiest for you.
I think that I did adjust them, not significantly, but enough that it would probably be best if I go ahead and provide you what I used.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I have, Board Member Marie Taylor, I have a question just to follow up. So I'm trying to make sense of the section on data collection and
Yes.
with the fact that the state is supportive of creating comprehensive plans. And so it seems to me like the way that I'm interpreting that is like we see the problem, we don't know exactly how to measure the problem, but we know some tools that we can put in our basket to ameliorate the problem. And I think that's the course that state is encouraging, the Attorney General's office is encouraging cities and counties to do. Is that a fair assessment?
I hesitate. I've not used the word encourage and I've not heard it used. I think that they do want communities to know ways that are out there to respond to concerns that you have. I think that they felt that this is a program that has shown to have some impact. So they want that tool to be available to you. And that's why they put it in the statute, that this training, you can have it. In fact, I think it says you shall have it if you are a community advisory board, which is a specific definition. I don't think they go beyond that. I think that they want each community to make that decision for themselves.
Thank you.
Certainly. Please feel free to reach out to me in the Attorney General's office anytime. If you have questions or follow-up, I will get information back to you. And with that, if there are no other questions, I'll go ahead and say good night. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Yeah.
Thank you. I trained.
Okay, we're ready to move on to the agenda items. And on agenda item number 2, this is Chair Salvini. Discussion of the Community Police Review Board draft ordinance. Let's return back to that that work that we were doing feverishly a few weeks ago. Let's review very quickly what happened between the last meeting where we were working on the ordinance and this meeting. And I think, and I want to thank everyone so much for patience and perseverance, and certainly helping me out on that. Stephanie, as a member of the at least original work group, that really was a springboard for us to continue our work on the ordinance, and certainly the new members, recognizing Marie and Jen and their input and their contributions that added to those efforts. And then a really nice turning point was really increasing the involvement of City Attorney Wheeler and Brandon in the process as well. So really appreciate all of that. So tonight, I think what's on board is to really finish that work, okay? And complete it based on the work that has been completed by City Attorney Wheeler. Check me on that, am I correct? And I want to apologize for not being present at the last meeting. And I'll talk about that here in a little bit, but Stephanie, can you check me on that?
This is Board Member Stephanie Littleton. I'm trying to follow you, Tanya. You want to know where we kind of left off, or?
We left off having some work done by the city to bring it back to us, and I think that's where we are. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So we've received, the draft back from the city.
Right.
Attached.
We've got a clean copy and a red line copy, right? Uh-huh.
Right. So they've made bullet points. Has everybody had an opportunity to read through it?
Right.
Jamie? Okay. And I'm not sure where the best, Tanya, to start at, but I know myself and Jane met and discussed, and of course, Bill's not here tonight from the original working group, but we have provided some feedback to the staff and to Brandon. I don't know if Randy, you do have a copy, correct? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Wasn't working. Yes, I do have a copy of that. Was pleased to receive it this afternoon. So thank you.
Yeah. Jane, do you have a preference? Do we want maybe Randy to go through with some of that with us, and maybe we present that, and then we can get everybody's different ideas? You have a thought?
I don't have a preference. We could just work through it. I don't know what other people did to prepare for this meeting. You and I have a list of suggestions that go in the order of the ordinance. Maybe other people do too. So if that were true, then it would make sense to just start at the top and work through whatever people wanted to.
Fair enough.
Say.
Yeah.
Let me just give you an overview of what Tony and I did. We basically, based on that meeting previously, we just took the comments of the board and tried to incorporate them. We didn't really get beyond section 205, I don't believe, because that's kind of where the discussion left off.
Right.
But we tried to put into ordinance form, into a framework, what was discussed and what we thought was the consensus of the board. And then we can go through them, I think, probably point by point and discuss and see what the will of the board is as we go through them again. So that was what our goal was to do.
Okay. Thank you, Randy, for that information and clarification. So we'll choose to go through the clean draft then? Is that good with everyone, or do you want to go through the red line?
Doesn't matter. It's the same either way.
Yeah. Okay. I prefer the clean, if that's okay with everyone.
That'd be easier to follow.
Okay. Great. Let's go ahead and start in then. I appreciate your comment about suggestions in order of the layout of the ordinance, Jane. So we'll proceed that way for sure. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and move through some of the primary sections. And I'll just go through each one very quickly to see if there are more suggestions that have been generated since we last visited this. So we'll start with 2501. Is everyone comfortable? Yes, Jane.
I am, this is Jane Gibson, board member. I am ambivalent about this suggestion. I would like to add where it says and welfare of all community members. I would like to add and police officers. And my ambivalence stems from my view that police officers are community members. So pulling them out is almost to suggest that they aren't. And I don't want to suggest that, but I also don't want this to appear that the board does not recognize that we're addressing a relationship between community members and police. So I'm going to stand with my suggestion and hear what other people think about adding and police officers to that.
So you're recommending and police officers after community, or
welfare of all community members and police officers within the city of Lawrence.
Discussion?
Board Member Marie Taylor, I don't think that's necessary. Because, and then then we'd have to change more on that sentence because we're also not promoting the health and safety necessary. I don't know if that falls within our charge. That seems to me more administrative. So, we are the community's police review board.
Jane?
Jane Gibson, board member. I do think that in order to fulfill our mission as a community police review board, we are responsible for promoting the health, safety, and welfare of the police every bit as much as of community members who are not police officers. I don't think that we can have that healthy relationship if we don't somehow recognize that in as much as the community members themselves must feel confidence and trust in the police must also feel confidence and trust in the community. I think it's important actually that we do recognize them. Whether or not we add that phrase is for me, I mean, that's a different matter, but that's really just about syntax, I guess. I think it would be better to put it in and police officers, if only symbolically, to acknowledge that we are dealing with a relationship and have to keep that relationship strong and healthy.
Okay,
can I just add that I don't think it's in the right, that language isn't in the right section. If that's we should put it in the purpose of the board and not in the establishment of the board. So I'm actually would prefer the language that exists already, well, that already exists in 2501, the original language.
Could we hear from other board members?
I would point out, this is Randy Larkin, Deputy City Attorney, and to point out that the first sentence is just basically that show that the City Commission is establishing this board according to its police powers, and that's the typical language of the police, health, safety, and welfare of the community. We can definitely add police members, but that's the purpose, is just to show that the reason for the establishment of the board by the police department goes beyond just the racial and bias-based policing of the previous kind of board or the previous thing, that this is to ensure the welfare of the community and the health and safety of the community. And that's just basically the basis of it. And this is pretty much boilerplate language. It occurs in a lot of other ordinances, a lot of other things like that. And that's all that's what we're trying to do here. And it would be very fair comment to add police officers if the board wanted it. And if they do not, that's fine too.
Okay. Ginny, I want to recognize Ginny Robinson, board member.
Ginny Robinson, board member. I think to me, if we add and police officers in, really it doesn't seem like the role of our board is to promote the health, safety, and welfare of police officers. And I think in 2502, it kind of lays out what we're doing. We are assisting, we are trying to foster a healthy relationship between community members and the police department. But it seems outside of our scope as a board to promote the health, safety, and welfare of police officers, which is what we'd be implying if we added them. That's kind of just how I read it.
Board member Gibson.
Jane Gibson, board member. The phrase is not the health, safety, and welfare of police officers. It is of police officers and community members, and that implies a relationship. If you had only one of those, it would be to say that we're responsible for the police department alone, and we're not. We're responsible for this relationship. So you have to read the whole phrase to understand its meaning. Welfare of all community members and police department means a relationship between those two. But I don't care either way. I mean, I think I made my point, so we can leave it to the rest.
You did. And if there's another way that we can recognize that intent in another section, as Marie suggested, that might be helpful as well. Board member Ginny Robinson.
I mean, Jenny Robinson, board member. I know what you're saying with that, but I'm saying that me as a community member who isn't knee deep in this, reading this, I would be able to break those apart and say, are we looking after the health, safety, and welfare of police officers as well as community members, or health, safety, and welfare of community members in relation to the police department? You know, I think it might be confusing for someone just a member of the community to read that.
Okay, Jane.
Jane Gibson, board member. I don't see a place in the purpose of the board where that might fit. I'm certainly open to that suggestion, but in lieu of that, if we can't find a reasonable place to put that under purpose, we could change that phrasing in the first 2501 to say, in order to promote the health, safety, and welfare of the relationship between community members and the police department within the city of Lawrence, Kansas. And we could make that explicit that this is a relationship so that there isn't any confusion.
Yeah, okay.
This is Board Member Stephanie Littleton. I think that term, Jane, is a really good idea. I like how that flows. And I do like the totality. I think, that we are including all, because we are all community members as well. So I do like how you rephrased that.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that as well. Any other feedback?
Marie Taylor, board member. I think that strikes the right balance. So I think that's a great suggestion.
That is definitely doable. Randy Larkin, Deputy City Attorney.
Very good. Thank you so much, Randy. Appreciate it. Okay, are we ready to move on then to 25?
No. Sorry, Sanjay Mishra. Jane, can you, so what we are saying is, in order to promote the health, safety, and welfare of all community members and their relationship with police?
I would say in relationship with the police, or the way you phrased it is fine, Sanjay. It's basically the same meaning.
Okay.
I think what will probably be is, in the order to promote the health, safety, and welfare of the relationship between all community members and police officers, I think we'll go with that way, if that's okay with you guys.
I don't, let's not wordsmith it here. We can see it when it's
Intent is good.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Got it. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. All right, let's move on to 2502 then. A purpose. Any suggestions or recommendations the third time around here? Jane.
Just that the definition for the department appears below, and yet it's used here without definition. So I think we either are going to need to move definitions up or go ahead and spell it out here so that this is clear that we mean the department, the police department.
This is Randy Larkin, Deputy City Attorney. We could definitely move the definitions up to second. Sometimes it's set up that way, if that makes it clear for everybody.
Yeah. Very good. Any other discussion on that? Okay, so we're moving 25, to be clear, 2503 up and making it the new 2502, and then purpose of the board will become 2503. All right? Okay, so let's start on the definitions then. Any changes or conversation or discussion, suggestions on 2503? Okay, if not, the new 2502 now is the definitions, right? Okay, so the new, yes, Jane.
Jane Gibson, board member. We just need to correct the Kansas statute reference under 250, is it 2G or is it our new, it's 3G right now. I think we're changing it to 2G so that it's 224609.
Right.
That is correct. I apologize. That was a typo that we had in the original memo.
Okay. Yeah.
And then it was corrected and then somehow leaked back into this document. So we apologize for that.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that, Randy. Sanjay?
Point I, is houselessness the word that we use, or should we put home ownership? What do people prefer? That seems
Okay,
remember, are we inventing words or create manufacturing words here?
Jenny, board member Jenny.
Jenny Robinson, board. It is a term that's used, houseless, because
Then I
home
would,
has some
yeah.
stigma attached to it.
I see something, I see the School of Social Welfare and I see the School of Business. This is what I'm looking at right now on my screen, right? So, okay, got it. Perfect. All right. Anything else in the definitions then before we officially move that into 2502? Okay, if not, let's go ahead and move forward. Thank you for your suggestions and the catches. Okay, let's move on to now the new 2503, and that's purpose of the board. Any suggestions, recommendations? Okay, if not, we're moving forward then. Very good, thank you. 2504, specific duties. We'll start with section A.
Yeah.
Jane?
Jane Gibson, board member. I have one on A6 if somebody doesn't have one earlier than that. A6, okay to go to that one?
Yeah.
Let me find my notes, sorry. Well, I had it in front of me. Okay. So it says the second report shall contain information regarding all community member complaints of the previous year, sorry. It seems to me that information is a little vague, and we would benefit from making that a more precise statement about exactly what we want here. So I'm thinking we need to specify that we want the numbers of different kinds of complaints and the dispositions and outcomes of each.
Okay, Randy, is that
We've got that. That's
perfect?
entirely appropriate to spell out what you want to have in those extra reports, because that
Very
report
good.
is basically for you.
Right. Okay,
So-
very good.
So just wanted to clarify, because the AG requires a very minimal report. We want a more extensive report.
Yes, and that does reflect the discussion we had earlier in September. Yeah. Board Member Taylor.
Board Member Marie Taylor, could we also include some kind of catch-all that says, other information as requested? Or is that not helpful to have a catch-all?
In number 6?
Right, after we specify the two items that Board Member Gibson mentioned.
Okay, Jane?
That would be really, really helpful. Thank you, Marie. Jane Gibson, board member.
That can be done. My question would be, when would that request be made? I mean, that the police department would obviously have to have that request in advance to prepare the report. I suppose you could maybe do it as a follow-up or something, but there would have to be some type of, not necessarily time frame, but just the timing of it's a little bit, if it's going to be different.
Randy, does that need to be in the ordinance?
It might be better to maybe break that out apart from it and say that, if during your deliberations or during discussions or meetings that there's certain information you may want, that you may then just request maybe a report on something from the police department and give them some certain amount of time to do it.
Right, so in addition to just the July 31st deadline, right? Okay, so what would be reasonable? Let's just say, let's talk hypothetically. If we needed some information or wanted a report by a particular time, and I think Stephanie, in fact, didn't you request one in a couple of meetings ago, right?
Yeah, board member Stephanie Littleton. I was just going to kind of speak on that, Tanya.
Sure.
Randy, that goes back to I was asking for summaries of the OPA cases. So I think that will have the totality of information we're looking for. So
yeah, I'm thinking of a reasonable time frame then. Is a month enough time? Board Member Jane.
Jane Gibson, board member. We should ask the expert. Dave Ernst is in the room.
Right.
I see Trent McKinley. Let's ask him
McKinley.
reasonable time for the police to get a heads up that we're coming with a request.
If I had a recommendation on this topic specific to A6, the July 31st reporting is based on the AG's bias-based policing report. Typically, reports of this nature are produced annually or at the beginning, relatively the beginning of the year, but as far as a time frame on notice, admittedly be dependent on topic. So I'd hate to pinpoint and say, yeah, a month would work. It depends upon how much research needs to be done on what information you're seeking. I guess if we could start with a month and then some sort of caveat, I ask for a little bit of leeway or wiggle room should the ask be greater than, the time frame allowed. I don't know exactly I don't think we all know what the ask will be until there is one, and then we could probably more provide an accurate time frame for each specific topic.
Sure, and on that, I'm wondering just real quickly that number 6 very specifically talks about the Attorney General reports, and what we're talking about is something different perhaps that could be useful for the group. So I'm wondering if that doesn't need to be another item number. I'm just raising the question. Marie?
Marie Taylor, board member. So my thoughts are that I think we do have to specify a time frame for when that second report would be due. And in terms of like a catch-all asking for additional information, we just say within a reasonable time frame is reasonable because we don't know. And then, obviously the request would have to be in advance. And it's a reasonable advance review. And so I think we have I don't want us to be so specific on the time frame or the number of days when we're doing the ordinance, because we could work that out. It's just it's basically a roadmap.
Okay, very good. Is everyone agreeable with that?
Yeah.
We're good. Okay, actually, good. Randy, is that good? Did we catch that?
Yes, we can work that in, and that's workable.
Okay, good. All right, anything else with regard to 2504A? Jane.
Ouch. Yeah, Jane Gibson, board member. Under 7, what is the rationale for that phrase from time to time? I mean, that's so loose, I just don't even know what it means and what it could entail.
We didn't want to place a specific deadline on the board without your agreement to it. So we didn't want to put it, but as you wanted to report to the board, to the city commission, you could, but that's basically the purpose of it. So as you deem it necessary, and if you never deem it necessary, then you wouldn't have to do the report perhaps, but we didn't want to cause it, but also allow you the opportunity to report to the city commission.
Well, this is sorry, Jane Gibson, board member. These are duties of the board, and that seems to say that we do report from time to time rather than that we may report from time to time. There's a difference, does it? Or maybe I'm nitpicking a bit. Marie, maybe with her and Randy, maybe you guys can sort that a bit. Do we need to make that a may instead of a duty to report from time to time? I mean, we have a duty to provide an annual report, but this other thing seems.
Marie Taylor, board member. I think that if the city commission wants us to report to them, that's our duty. So we know that we, at a minimum, we have to do the annual report, but if you ask for our recommendations on, say, a police policy they're reviewing, and they send it to us, then it's our duty then to report to them. So in the time to time, to me, it just means that we don't know when we'll be called upon, but we will respond.
But I think it also implies that we may initiate that as well. Would that be correct?
That's what I understood.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
both ways. We tried to leave it open enough where that it could go either way, yes.
Okay. All right, very good.
Okay.
Are we good there then? Okay.
Yeah, whatever, move on.
Right. Still on 2504, specific duties of the board, section A. This might be the last call. Anything else in that section? Okay, if not, let's move forward to B. And suggestions and conversation. Board Member Gibson.
Jane Gibson, board member. I would like to delete not on its face, frivolous, but is otherwise, so that it reads, if the board determines that the complaint is deficient.
Board Member Robinson.
I think maybe I agree. Jenny Robinson, board member. I agree. I'm wondering if we could take it a step further and just say, but is determines that the community member complaint cannot be investigated properly, the board may request from the community member making the complaint a more definite statement. That to me sounds readable and understandable for community members.
Sounds good to me.
How about if you repeat it one more time, Jenny? Would you mind doing that?
Yeah, did Marie want to say something about it?
No, Marie,
Marie Taylor, board member. I just have questions about how do we determine something's deficient? And so I understand on its face deficient, the concept, and frivolous on it, but if we take away on its face or frivolous, then I know even less of how I determine it's deficient. That's why I really liked Jenny's comment to say that we would ask them to make a more definite statement if we did not know whether it was sufficient or not sufficient. So, but the deficient is problematic for me.
Yeah, the thought would be that, say you receive a complaint that a police officer stopped me. That would be not enough to make a determination as to whether or not there was a problem or not, because maybe the stop was for good reason, good probable cause, but not. So you might seek a further statement to determine whether or not the stop was such that it should be investigated. Now, the frivolous, we can get rid of that, but the purpose of that was, you're going to receive some complaints from people that say, I was driving 50 down Massachusetts Street and the police officer pulled me over and gave a ticket. Well, that's what happens when you drive down 50 miles an hour down Massachusetts Street. Now, there might be other problems related to it, but if that's all they report, it might be frivolous. Or the complaint might be that the police officer frowned and did not smile at me. I don't know if you want to be in the business of investigating that, and that'll give you at least a gate to cut some of that out. And that was the purpose of it. But we can definitely expunge that language, which is fine.
Thank you, Randy. And if we could go back to Ginny, if you could recall the phrasing that you used earlier, if you could repeat that, that would be helpful.
Yeah, Jenny Robinson, board member. I just was reading what's written, but cut out some of it. So if the board determines that the community member complaint and then delete cannot be investigated properly, the board may request from the community member making the complaint more definite statement. So.
Is everyone good with that?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Because I think base and frivolous is not in my common vocabulary, but it might be in some legalese. So yeah, very good, thank you. Okay, anything else in section B? Okay. You see folks reading. Marie, you good with that? Jenny?
Jenny Robinson, board member. Do we then need to change the language, making the complaint a more definite statement, whatever medium will be most effective to cure any deficiency? do we need to change that since we don't use the word deficient? You know, start of the sentence. Does that make sense? What I'm asking?
Yes, Brandy, would you have any recommendations on that?
Is there like a more human-friendly way to say that?
I suppose we could replace that entire phrase, effective to cure any deficiency, to say that in whatever medium will be most efficacious. That work, or is that too legalese as well?
No, not a problem with legalese. No, that sounds good. Marie?
Marie Taylor, board member, or can we just end the sentence earlier? We just send it out for a more definite statement.
Board Member Gibson?
Jane Gibson, board member. I guess I would ask if, it seems to me that it's probably important that we have allowed the communication of this additional statement in any medium that will be most effective. I don't have a problem with the deficiency, but it seems to me to open up the possibility of receiving that statement in more than one way is probably useful in the ordinance.
So maybe the period after effective?
That's fine with me.
Okay, all right, let's do that then. Is that okay, Randy?
Yes, absolutely. And the rationale for putting it in any medium was because maybe a person has difficulty writing.
Right.
Or maybe a person has difficulty speaking, and then they could perhaps communicate in a better way. So we wanted to make sure everything was covered.
Good, thank you. Great.
Very good, thank you. Okay, section B. I think we're good there. Let's move on to C then. Board Member Gibson.
Jane Gibson. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be dominating this process. Stephanie, I should just turn this over and let you do some of these because you've got the same list I've got. Under 2504C2, it says redactions include but are not limited to. That concerns me, the are not limited to, and this is a legal question. Is there not some complete or clear list of what the law protects? What would be a kind of thing that would need protection that is not on this list that we already have? It looks like a pretty extensive list. Am I mistaken? Is there something obviously missing here, or?
No, but there is not an exhaustive list. And so we are basically on our own and creating a list. And I think it's basically a protection for everybody that if we forgot something that would be a problem for anybody, yeah, as a catch-all. It's not my favorite way of doing it, but it's more of a, a cover protection.
Okay, thank you, Randy. Marie?
Marie Taylor, board member, and then it doesn't really address like common law privacy. So, I mean, unless you want to say, instead of saying included but not limited to, you could say any other applicable law that provides for confidentiality. I mean, like something like that.
And that perhaps is a better way of doing it. That'd be perhaps a preferable way of doing it, and get rid of the included but language, but then add a kind of a catch-all phrase at the end and anything else that would be protected by law. That's probably a preferable way of doing it.
And okay, so that could be added then to that area, Randy?
Yes, we would just tack that on at the end as kind of a catch-all.
Perfect, thank you. Jane?
No, that got it for me. Thank you very much.
Okay, perfect. Board Member Littleton.
This board member, Stephanie Littleton. I'm going to go backward if I may. I think, Jane, you're done on that one.
Yep, thank you.
And this is going to kind of open up for discussion, and this is actually going to be something that will probably impact both the board and OPA. But I just wanted to kind of throw out for discussion where it says after completion of any investigation of a community member complaint, the Department of OPA shall forward to the board for its review the results of the investigation. Should there be some type of a timeline? Is that even practical? To put that on for the OPA to complete that? I mean, is that even somewhat to consider? And then does that turn that on us as well. I mean, I think they do ask in here that if we determine that there is not sufficient evidence, that we immediately return the file, and those kinds of terminology is included. But it kind of caught me because I would want to assume that OPA would try to do that expeditiously or, within reason.
But it's embedded.
But should there be something, what is that? What would be practical? Anybody have any thoughts on that?
Stephanie, where are you?
It's on C, the very first paragraph, where it says after completion of any investigation.
The first sentence.
Yeah.
See.
Gotcha. Okay. Go ahead.
Marie.
Marie Taylor, board member. So I did think about that early on when we were reviewing this ordinance, that there really doesn't seem to be a time frame on the OPA to have a response time frame for complaints. But I also thought, well, we're the advisory board. We're not their managers. We're not their boss. So it didn't seem like this was the right place to make that kind of requirement of them. That seems to me something like that comes from like city manager. So that would be something we could recommend to have a certain time frame. But I didn't think that this ordinance for us was the way to mandate that. That was my feeling when I thought through it.
Jane?
Jane Gibson, board member. I wonder though, I can appreciate that point of view, but I wonder if it's not really, this is the place for us to say, since the investigation is complete, that they should send that to us in the same way that when we receive a complaint, we have 3 days to get it to them. And when they receive a complaint, they have 3 days to get it to us, just so that we all have copies of the same files. Why not have, as soon as the investigation is complete, another 3-day window to get us a copy of the investigation? Is there any reason that they couldn't or shouldn't or wouldn't want to do that?
Sanjay and then Marie.
So I think the time frame, I absolutely agree that limitation should be on both sides, but that time frame needs to be a little more flexible, because if you have to do extensive redaction, and if it's not a 5-page report, but if it's a 500-page report.
Ooh. We don't want those, period.
So exactly.
They can just keep that.
So that's why I'm thinking is, if you think about the Mueller report, for redactions, it took forever for the redactions to happen.
That's a good point, Sanjay.
Yeah, that is. Marie?
Marie Taylor, board member. So I want to make sure I'm understanding the request that are we saying that we wanted to put a time frame on the OPA to do their investigation, or are we just talking about the time frame to turn over the report?
Yes, to turn over the report.
To turn over the report.
Okay. Because my comments before were just about like
to handle the complaint. Okay.
Right, to handle the complaint, which I think we could possibly do a recommendation on that process. Hello, but yeah, the time frame, again, you could default to reasonable, promptly, something like that, to kind of convey that we want this to happen efficiently, but without having to lock in a specific time frame. And then we could work it out through just the process to have expectations of them. We can communicate those, what we mean by promptly and reasonably, but then we wouldn't have that set out in the ordinance.
And another thing is,
go ahead, Randy.
It can be made, promptly after the redactions are made, perhaps, because the file's coming to you. If it's a community member's file, so if there's going to be redactions, they're going to have to be done, and that could come to the board within a certain period of time, or promptly or reasonably after redactions.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Stephanie, does that address and satisfy?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate everybody's input on that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Randy, was that clear enough for you? Want to make sure we catch that.
Do you want to leave it reasonably, or do you want to put a certain day, time, and you want to track it to redactions or from the completion of the investigation?
Reasonably. Sanjay Mishra, board member, reasonably is good enough, right? Or do you want to say promptly? In a reasonable time frame. I think you got to work on trust, and otherwise it's difficult.
Okay, Randy's got it. He knows intent. All right, very good. Anything else in section C? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, let's move ahead to section D. And open it up for discussion, and that's numbers 1 and 2. Let's go with Jane and Stephanie.
I'll defer to Stephanie.
All right.
Oh, thank you. Board Member Stephanie Littleton. We're probably trying to jump on the same one. On D, would like to consider deleting the word immediately and change it to within 3 days, where it says, basically in the middle of it, if the board determines additional investigation is
okay, yeah.
Change it to
the center of D, the first paragraph. If the board determines that additional investigation is necessary, then it shall return the investigation file to the OPA sergeant designee. You said immediately you want to change to 3 days, or?
We'll change from the word immediately to consider changing it to say within 3 days.
Okay, Jane?
Jane Gibson, board member. Stephanie, do you think we should follow the model from above and say in a reasonable
time frame?
We'll say reasonably.
Yeah. Yeah.
Within a reasonable time frame or something like that. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm good with that.
Randy, did you catch that?
I got it.
Thank you. All right, very good. Anything else in section D, 1 or 2? Okay, Stephanie?
All right, this board member Stephanie Littleton, see if I can get to where I find that. Jane, can you find it?
Are you looking for D2?
D2, yeah. Okay.
A question of budget.
Okay, so I have a thought as far as where it says in D2, as budget allows. This is just a question, I guess, for the city. If let's say the budget doesn't allow, and we do feel as a board that it's necessary to have an independent investigator, is it possible that we utilize resources within the city or county and maybe reach out and ask for assistance from the Douglas County Sheriff's Office or maybe the KU Police Department? What is that possibility?
We would have to have some type of agreement or memorandum of understanding in place. And the situation is we would have to pay them for that anyway. We would have to pay for their time because, they're not going to volunteer it for us. We'd have to pay the overtime or whatever it is. For example, when we've had other police departments investigate an event with the police department, we pay the other jurisdictions officers for their time and things like that.
Okay. All right. Very good. Board member Marie, your hand was up. Is that what was your hand up? I'm sorry. Yeah. Board Marie, Sanjay, and then Jane.
Board member Marie Taylor, is there a way to not make it seem that the request will be denied for any kind of budgetary issue? I mean, that's really, like, even if and I guess it's because of the shall is in there too. So then the saying as the budget allows, well then shall means nothing because the budget could always not allow it. So I think this is really, personally, I think this is where this has some meat in this.
Teeth in it there, right.
And if city commission doesn't want to have a reserve fund for this, then they can decide to change that language when they review this ordinance. But I don't think that should be our recommendation to already put in a caveat.
Okay. All right. Board member Sanjay and then Jane.
Sanjay Mishra, board member. I absolutely agree with what Mary said. I want to strike out as budget allows. And I would say the city manager will. If the city doesn't want the investigation to be done, it needs to clarify that upfront.
Would you want to strike shall and replace with will?
Will.
Okay, I'm just double checking on that. Okay, Jane?
And as budget allows goes. That otherwise,
Right.
what's the
As
point?
budget
We
allows
cannot do anything.
Capitalize the as in the city manager, right? Will appoint, not shall, but will appoint. Okay, Board Member Jane?
I have Jane Gibson, board member. I have a question for Randy. Does this ordinance authorize us then, or I mean, does it bind the city manager? Let's say we strike as budget allows, does that then bind the city manager to appoint an independent third-party investigator? I guess I have a concern that we don't have any input other than all citizens have into the city's budget, and there may be, and I doubt there is at this point, a budget line for CPRB investigators. So I don't know how we negotiate that, since we could say that he'll do it or she'll do it if we have a woman city manager, but so we could say that, but unless there's a budget line for it, it's meaningless. So I'm wondering why we have that at all.
This is Randy Larkin, Deputy City Attorney. We struggled with this sentence quite a bit, and the intent would be that the city manager would do it, but sometimes funds have to be moved around. Sometimes they can't be done immediately. And so that's kind of why we were talking as budget allows, and that we included the shall. So we wanted to have the teeth of it in there, but to allow the city manager some flexibility to perhaps move money around or have it. And there's also the added problem regarding the cash basis law, and that we can't earmark funds that we don't have for something else already, or we're in violation of state law. So we're trying to work around those 2 or 3 different things all in that same sentence, which is probably why it doesn't work so well.
So we really do need to lobby the city commission to create a budget line for these investigators.
Well, I think that I think this will drive that piece, because if part of our role is to try to be as just as possible, being as unbiased and objective as possible is important at this point. That would be my feedback to this, is that it would be an expectation. Marie?
Marie Taylor, board member. So Sanjay very kindly sent us some materials about different types of boards. And one type of board is an oversight board, which is a civilian agency, not an advisory board, but actually has authority like over an OPA type of office, and does this independent third-party investigator type work. So to me, this is like a compromise on that, and it gives us the flavor of that without relying on us to do that work, because we're just an advisory board. So this is, to me, really critical. And if they don't support it, well, we'll find out fairly soon if they strike it from the draft ordinance. So I think it's important for us to put this out there as a solution. And if they choose not to select it, or they choose not to have reserve funds for it, which I think they should have reserve funds for it, even if it's not needed immediately, right? We don't have a case that we do have to have an appointed investigator to investigate. So I think I'm in favor of keeping it, and if there's more needed to massage the language to get what we want, I think we can leave that to Randy to do that.
This board member, Stephanie Littleton, and that is very well said, Marie. I think that was very, very well said.
And I think the intent here that's driving everything is this need for a just and objective outcome, free from bias, and certainly heavy on objectivity. So good. We're good here, Jane?
Jane Gibson. So Marie, are you arguing that we should keep the word shall to keep it stronger?
Board member Marie Taylor, I don't want to get into the will shall debate in the legal world. Randy knows. are very big into shall. I'm not one of them. I'm for will, so.
Well, that was Sanjay's suggestion. Let's go with will.
Yeah. Some people think shall means something different than will, but to me, it's very.
Will is clear, yeah.
You know, if you look hard enough, you can find case law where they say may is shall and shall is may. So it's all relative.
Mhm. Very good.
Well, then I think we should go with Sanjay's suggestion and change it to will.
This board member, Stephanie Littleton, I knew this was going to be a nice topic, so thank you for all your input on this. I think this is a very important point here, so thank you.
I'm feeling like we really own this right now. We can really articulate well with it. So this is good work, everyone. Okay, we ready to move ahead? Okay, let's go to E. While we're contemplating E, I want to go back to a comment you made earlier, Marie. This is the Chair Salvini. And I really appreciate the fact that we, what is our role? How do we define ourselves? Because we will not be doing that work. And we are oversight. We are a volunteer group. We're here to represent the community. So that point is real important. And again, thanking and recognizing Sanjay for sending that material. Okay, we're on E again. Okay, I don't see any movement. Let's move on to F. Okay, Marie on F.
Marie, board member. Marie Taylor, board member. Okay. I really like this change. I think it's really helpful because before there was no definition for substantial competent evidence, and so this is a really good revision.
Mm-hmm.
And it sticks with what that is, as opposed to us trying to figure out what it meant or how we were supposed to review evidence that came before the board, which I knew that was problematic for a lot of members.
Right, very good. Okay. That was kudos to you, Randy. Randy and Terry. Okay. All right, we ready to move on to 2505 membership then? Okay, let's go ahead and start with this section. And I'm Jane Gibson.
Yes, Jane Gibson, board member. I have an issue here. The chief may designate an employee of the city to be the department's liaison to the board, and such designee shall serve as a non-voting ex officio member of the board. I would like it to be clear that this ex officio representative of the police department is not a participant in board deliberations in executive session. So somehow I'd like to make that explicit here. We could add something like the police liaison facilitates communication between the board and the department, but does not participate in board deliberations in executive session.
Okay, Sanjay?
Sanjay Mishra, board member, or we could put a language which says we'll only participate in executive sessions at the discretion of the board.
No.
No? Okay. Because sometimes you may want them to get some information.
Well,
so we decide if they come into the meeting or not.
Well, I think what's assumed here is that in our deliberations, we can make a request of law enforcement in an open session and get that information so it can be taken into a closed executive session. Would that be correct? Marie?
Marie Taylor, board member. I'll let Randy speak to that.
Okay.
Correct. I don't believe it was ever the intent that the ex officio officer would be involved in the deliberations. But so some clarification to make that clear is probably appropriate.
Both with deliberation and executive session? Okay, thank you.
Sanjay, I'm all in favor of getting information where we need it, but I'm not in favor of breaching that line. In executive session, that is where the board gets to speak to itself. We get to speak to each other. Jane, give-
Additionally, there is some law that there is law that provides that unless it's a real participant in executive session, then they can't participate in executive session. So otherwise it becomes a open meetings violation. So there is some of that as well.
Let's just be explicit.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, anything else in section 2505? Okay, thank you. Let's move ahead then to 2506, qualifications.
I would clarify that we did nothing with this section because the discussions left off just before here. So this is just for open area for the board to discuss as to what qualifications they believe are necessary.
Right. I don't have the slides up right in front of me, but Marie, did you, since this is where we left off and we were working at weaving your recommendations into the ordinance, were there any, I don't have them up right now, so I'm counting on you if that's okay, that needed to have a point of discussion in this section from any of your recommendations?
Yes, Marie Taylor, board member. So Tonya, you need to get 3 screens. That's what I got going on.
Well, I left my laptop at work. You're right.
So I put in 2 of the slides from my previous presentation to add in a new subsection 3, which sets out a character-based qualification. So the way it works is, and I sent you all beforehand, I guess it's been a month or so, that this is coming from Eugene, Oregon's ordinance for its advisory board for police review matters. And I thought that they did a really good job. And I feel like Lawrence has a lot in common with Eugene, Oregon, being a college town and having, have a diverse population, but not so much, if you know what I mean. So, so the way that what it lays out is that it's a characteristics test based on open-ended application questions. And to me, that since this board already requires an application that's different from other boards, that it is possible to have an application process that asks a series of questions. And just like all the board members are selected through the process with review by the mayor, and in turn the city commission would be reviewing the answers. But the tests through these questions, and I imagine us as a board could help advise on what these questions would be. But the application would be trying to get at these, which I've listed out here, five factors. Should I just read them?
Sure. Does everyone have them up? I finally have them up. I'm sorry. Does everyone have those up? Okay. And that would be the first slide, qualifications, Article 2506, the proposed new subsection. Okay.
So should I read them? I don't think I need to read them out. I mean, just to save time, if you all have reference to them. And then my next slide is the rationale. So when I went back and watched the formation of this board, that commission at that time was very concerned about having a board in place that was unbiased, that could be objective, and that seemed to me their main reason for having a process that was different from other boards. So I think that interest in having that perspective, having a fair, impartial perspective, could be achieved through an open-ended questionnaire. So that's why I think that this would work for our community too. And I think I've already talked through this in other meetings about the reasoning why I think it's a problem, because it has a desperate impact if you start having just setting up discriminatory markers for leaving out communities that are overrepresented, over policed,
Right.
marginalized communities. So we're already limiting the pool. I also think it has a chilling effect. I had to think twice. I mean, I have not committed a crime. I passed the test, you know, but I think it did have a chilling effect on whether I wanted to be a part of this board. The fact that I knew that people who look like me might not have a shot because, you know, within the last 3 years, they were arrested for a drug offense that may or may not have been, you know, targeted. I don't know. I mean, it raised some questions for me of what am I signing up for? So I think that with what we know about, and I've also sent you all sorts of studies, you could ever read about how there is racial profiling, there is over policing of certain communities. And so do we want to present another alternative? So that's basically what this is about. And then I also noticed that if we have a ban for one group of people, but we don't say have former law enforcement officers banned as well, what are we saying? And if we're saying that once you have a criminal history, that you can never serve on these kinds of boards, then what are we also saying about the criminal justice system? It's sort of like we're also saying that it's not a system for rehabilitation. Once you're a criminal, you're always a criminal. I mean, I don't think we want, so to me, it provides us some way to think through having an alternative method to get us what we want, which is a, you know, fair and impartial board.
Right.
And so I think that's all I have. I mean, that's pretty much my point on this.
Okay, open for discussion. Let's just discuss what's been presented right now. Sanjay?
So my question was, is this insertion going to replace entire A, or Marie, are you proposing it replace 5 down?
So Board Member Marie Taylor, I'm suggesting that it replace, where did I put it? Give me a moment because I have to pull up my old one. Keep talking amongst yourselves.
It would be in section B, I believe. Would that be accurate, Jane? Mm-hmm.
Jane Gibson, board member. Some of the criteria for membership, some of the qualifications are about eliminating conflict of interest on the board.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important to eliminate conflict of interest on the board. So I also think that these 5 proposed criteria are great, and I would like to see those inserted. I don't think that they can replace everything that we already have under qualifications.
Right.
So for example, I'm good with 1 through 5. 5 is a conflict of interest statement, have no pending criminal charges in local, state, or federal jurisdiction or court of law. It seems to me that that's a reasonable thing, that anybody that is likely in that system probably should not be sitting on the board because of the possibility of a conflict of interest. At the same time, I recognize that, let's say, 6 through 9 are the ones that are most likely to, I guess, discriminate against people of color if they are and I believe they are overrepresented in the criminal justice system. So I could see deleting 6 through 9. Then again, and 10 is another one that I would keep, and 11 I would keep. And I'm okay with deleting 12 because I don't see how that creates a conflict of interest for us.
Agreed. Okay.
And the other thing I would say, just as long as we're waiting here, is while I really, really like the 5 criteria, I'm not entirely comfortable with our determining by which method the mayor should assess the qualifications of an applicant. So an open-ended application questionnaire is just one of many possibilities. So, I mean, I like those as an anthropologist. You know, we ask open-ended questions because we know we get a lot more and better information that way, but it's not the only possibility. And it might be that we want to make that a more inclusive statement if we feel the need to make any statement at all about methodology, so that it could be assessed by open-ended application questions and other methods or something to make it, to broaden it and allow the mayor some flexibility. I don't want us to determine, I don't want us to write the questions. I don't want us to be involved at that level. I think we've got enough on our plates, although I certainly appreciate the fact that, you know, we could advise about those questions if we were asked to do so, but really that seems like that's the responsibility of the city commission and its mayor more than ours. So that's all I have to say.
Okay, very good. Marie.
Board Member Marie Taylor. So I'm looking back at my notes, and yes, it was 6, 8, and 9 that I was talking about replacing.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that again? 6?
It was what Board Member Gibson said.
Okay, 6 through 9 then, strike?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the recommendation is to strike 6 through 9. And Board Member Gibson also made the recommendation to strike 12.
Board Member Marie Taylor, that one's a little bit trickier because that seems to me like it's an open issue if you currently are delinquent in taxes. So I'm not sure if that's even something that all boards have to have cleared.
Maybe Randy could speak to that.
Randy?
Mm-hmm.
I'd have to look at it for boards. I know that for entering into contracts and various other things or getting incentives and various other things from the city that you do have to meet this standard. I'd have to check on the other on what require for other boards. I know the first 5 are typically required of board membership. Typically may not have a felony conviction, but whether we go there or not here is up to you.
Can you help us understand what the conflict of interest with that one would be, or what the problem would be with being in arrears? And Marie, you mentioned something about how that's a little trickier, and I'm obviously not seeing something here that you could help me understand.
The city typically might be in the position of suing somebody for being in arrears or seeking money for fees, and we typically don't like to do that of members of boards or other people that are actually affiliated or working with the city. So it makes it kind of a situation that's awkward, and there's probably a slight conflict there.
Well, that's what we need then, is a statement that says that the city can't sue members of its boards.
Board Member Jenny
Robinson, board member. I'm wondering, Randy, is there a way to make the language like the least restrictive possible? Like whatever the most basic requirement of boards like can't be in, you know, the legal process with the city currently. But I mean, I know people who are going to be paying legal fees, child support, you know, for the rest of their lives. And I would hate for them to be counted out because of those.
That would be a state matter, so that wouldn't affect here, but this is more along the lines of parking fees and things that might be owed to the city that the city would go after. That would be the court costs or the court things, the municipal court as opposed to the district court. That's beyond our purview, beyond our jurisdiction. We'll work on this language. How's that?
Okay, thank you. Board Member Sanjay.
Board Member Sanjay Mishra. So when I was looking at be at least 18 years of age, is that standard? Why should it be? Can it be dropped to 16?
Oh my Lord.
I think it said it, the voting age is the purpose of being 18.
when is somebody charged as an adult?
At 18, but a prosecutor for a good cause shown can waive somebody up from under that age to adult status, depending on the nature of the crime and et cetera. So.
Because who knows? I was thinking some high school student would, this would be fun. Good for them.
Yeah, there's also, as an 18-year-old, you can't enter into contracts. The statute of limitations for any injury to a minor doesn't accrue till you're 18, that kind of deal. So I think that's the basis for it.
Thank you. Board Member Murray?
Okay, I have Board Member Marie Taylor, two things. Following up on that, we have to sign a confidentiality agreement, so we wouldn't want a minor probably. So to do that. And then we have to have their parents sign. It would get complicated.
Or guardian, or legal guardian.
Exactly. So I want to just clarify that the language that I was talking about, the characteristics, I was thinking it would fit under following A2. So it would be it would fall after the 18 resident, and then the third I had slotted it, and then the numbering would shift down. It would have to all be renumbered. So that's where I was thinking it would fit in.
Okay. I guess what I would want to say there is that all of the items in qualifications are more concrete, a little more concrete in section A, whereas in section B, still required, are other items, which I guess when I read yours again, I thought maybe it would be more appropriate in B, in section B. But again, that's just because I was looking at this as being, are you 18? Are you either you're not employed by the city or not? Kind of a little harder.
Board Member Marie Taylor, I have no preference. So whatever makes more sense.
Okay, Randy, do you have any comment on that?
Probably a better idea to keep the conflict of interest issues together, and then those are more of the, something that prohibits, and then what these are more inclusive as opposed to prohibitory. So it might be a good idea to set those afterward and together.
And it's desirable. It's the intent of the desirability, in meeting whatever outcome is expected of the assessment or that process, right? Sanjay?
Sorry, it's Sanjay Mishra, board member. When I looked at it, I thought it should be in A, not in B.
Oh, okay.
Because B is after the fact things. A is funnel at the top.
Things,
if you bring people in.
To do. Got it. Okay.
It's got to be in the first part.
I see that. Jenny?
Jenny Robinson, board member. That's exactly what I was going to say. The A is more about who you are. B is about what you need to do.
Got it. I see that. Okay, so the recommendation was, do you have a preference there, Randy, or will you just put that in?
Yeah, I'll just, we'll renumber those. We'll probably keep the ones that are, because some of these are required by city policy resolutions that, regarding appointments to boards. We might, but that, are basically restrictions or qualifications, and these are more of positive attributes that they want seeking for. So I may break it down into two sections, keep them a little bit. We'll work on it and come back to you guys with something.
Okay, very good. And then are you going to double check on 6 through 9, the recommendation to strike those to make sure those can be stricken?
I'm sure some of them will, there's some concern because, for example, there are certain restrictions on a person with a felony conviction. you know, you can't vote, you can't carry guns, whether you can serve on a board. Now, whether or not those are fair or not, that's, you know, we'll look at that a little bit and we'll come back, but we'll definitely limit and reduce whatever it is there, and then we can discuss that further.
Sure, thank you. But you do understand our intent here, and that is to increase the accessibility to participate.
Absolutely, I understand that completely, and I understand the overrepresentation of minorities in that type of deal.
Thank you. Okay, very good. Thank you. Board Member Murray.
And also in looking at we can strike out that open-ended question. I mean, we're just saying, right.
Where is that? I'm sorry, Marie, which one?
Just that we don't have to dictate the method of determining the
gotcha.
way of determining if those characteristics are met. So we can.
Sure. And that's on your recommendations? Right. Okay. Randy, did you get that okay? Perfect.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Okay, any other visits, comments to this section? Board Member Gibson.
Jane Gibson, board member, not on this section. I just wanted to say that I think the staff just did a bang up job on this, and they've saved us little time, and they've made it clear, and they've helped us a lot. And I really appreciate the way that they've worked with us and listened to us so that they could produce a document that we can get behind, and then we'll see what the city commission has to say. But I just wanted to say, for my part, you know, how grateful I am to Randy and Tony and the staff for working on this and for doing such a good job.
Absolutely. Bold and underlined for the record. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, revisiting this section for the last time then, 2506 qualifications. We were under A, anything under B? Okay, if not, let's move on to 2507, confidentiality. It's pretty straightforward. Pretty pro forma. Okay, if there's nothing there, we'll move ahead to 2508, breach of privacy. Okay, again, pretty pro forma. Let's move ahead to 2509 then, terms. Board Member Marie.
So Board Member Marie Taylor, I had a concept that is not reflected in this document at all. So this would be new to think about. But I would really like to have it clear that we can report out from from our deliberation, some kind of written summary of what happened with the complaint. So it not saying the record, but some sort of written recommendation that we give that somehow we can lay out some kind of level of facts. Because I think part of this is there's transparency that we would like to have as a board with the OPA, but we have not then flowed that down to having the public also have some kind of transparency. So we're just replacing, my concern is that it would just be replacing us as the target of not being transparent. So if there was a way to, because I know we'll have a redacted record that we look at, and then when we have our deliberation, we'll have a report where we give a recommendation. Can we make that report, subject to reviews, further redactions, available to the public? Like we would have on our website, these are the complaints and this is how we deliberated on them, so that they have an idea of what's going on. And I know this is in some ways possible, because I can see when I look through other cities and they have review advisory boards, they're issuing out reports that give summaries of encounters, things that have happened. And so and it may be that it's, you know, of course it's anonymous, and it could be stripped of identifying factors. But if we could have something like that in as part of our, and I think it goes, let me give me a moment to figure out where
I'm thinking specific duties of the board, section 2504.
It would probably be subsection H. And I mean, a summary or something like that. We'll look into that. That's
Okay.
potentially possible depending on what the information is or is not. But we obviously want to strip away identifying factors, as she said. But at the same time, you could say there was a complaint of excessive force, and the board found it was something of that nature, whatever the board's finding was, or something of that line. We'll look.
Okay, is everybody satisfied with that?
Madam Chair.
Yes. Brandon.
Sorry, this is Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. I'll defer to the two board members who raised their hands first.
Okay, thank you. Was that Marie and, okay, Marie, go ahead, and then Jane.
Board Member Marie Taylor, I'm thinking of more than just, I think people want some facts, like at least scenarios of what's happening, so that we can, so not just what we basically have already been receiving from the police in their annual report. So I think they want to know the scenario, like maybe not exactly what neighborhood it's happening in, but you know, there was an encounter, there was this claim, these were, you know, the circumstances, some bit more information than just a finding not sustained next. You know, I think that there is some desire to know more information, and if we could, and I could send to Randy some things I found in other cities, if it's helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, that would be great.
It's a good suggestion. Thank you. Sanjay? Oh, no, I'm sorry, Jane.
Jane Gibson, board member. I like the idea of having having a website for the CPRB where the further redactions of case material could be posted in ways that do protect the identities of, or all the confidentiality that the law requires. But I think I agree with the importance in promoting this relationship between the community and the police of this kind of transparency that would promote trust in this board, that we're doing our best to try to promote those relationships. And it would, I think it would instill confidence in community members if they felt the need to complain, that there would be some place that those complaints would be heard and that it could matter. And I think to the extent that any sorts of complaints are upheld, you know, that also supports, you know, the best conduct of our best police. And I want to do that as well. So I'm in favor of more rather than less information, more transparency rather than less transparency, but always with keeping in mind that we have confidentiality laws to respect as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think, in fact, that's really important. So if we're down the road when we're talking about outside of the ordinance, how we hold ourselves accountable, I think we've had conversations about that. What's our responsibility to the community? What kind of benchmarks or performance indicators are we going to construct for ourselves in terms of holding ourselves accountable, certainly to the public and to ourselves? That might be one indicator. Are we meeting whatever outcome that task is meant to achieve? Does that make sense? Is it to inform with the intent to build trust, right?
Yeah.
And then participate in the efforts of all transparency as well. So yes, Sanjay.
So we had talked about this, I don't know when, maybe September, or even before. The three things we were looking at were access to the board members, so we could be community representatives. Second was transparency in our actions and everything that we said. And third was accountability. And I think transparency what Murray pushed for was transparency in the process. It could even be tacked on as accountability, that we will share with the community the information or whatever, something, report out to the community every 6 months or every 12 months, something like that. So that, as we said, about this time next year, how can we say that as a board we did a good job? And we are asking everybody else to do that, so we must hold ourselves to some standard.
Absolutely. Okay, so I think we're all in agreement on this. And Randy, you're going to work on where that might be placed, correct? Okay, perfect.
That is correct.
All right. Board Member Littleton.
Yeah, this is Board Member Stephanie Littleton. To Sanjay's point, this is really, you know, our conversation, right, about considering a comprehensive bias-based plan. So just kind of throwing that back at us all after we had that training. But, you know, that's the critical piece of us, right? So
Very
yeah.
good. Thank you. Board Member Marie Taylor.
Board Member Marie Taylor. I found had to go dig through my original notes, but I was thinking that it came after the voting on the written report, and my notes had said we should not duplicate the lack of transparency. The final report should be released and not include the names of those, and be in a form that protects confidentiality of the parties while providing the public with information on the overall circumstances of the appeal. We used to say appeal, a complaint.
Yeah.
But those are my original notes. And so that was my original sense of, you know, what I thought needed to happen in terms of continuing on this level of transparency through all stages.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to take us back to where we were in terms of terms. 2509. Were there any suggestions or edits, modifications in this section? Okay, if not, we'll move forward to 2510, meetings. Okay, moving forward to 2511. And moving on then to 2512. Okay, and then, Board Member Taylor.
Board Member Marie Taylor, I just want to talk just real briefly about how complaints, ethics complaints, and how it fits with what we do. Because I just want to, you know, I'm listening to what the community members have said about this, and part of me is a little bit confused myself, because when I've lived in other cities, it was very clear on the city's website that I lived in how you would file a complaint, like an ethics complaint. And boy, did, you know, we got them. So, I mean, so it seems to me like there's a missing element of how a community member would know how to complain, generally speaking, about ethics issues to the city. It seems so, but I also don't think that it falls within this ordinance to determine that there's an ethics ordinance that would lay out the process for how you do that. Or if it's not needed in the actual ordinance, then it's just a mechanism that the city could then kind of lay out more clearly for members of the public. So I don't think it really fits in our bylaws or in our ordinance, but it's just to kind of make that clear, since we are in the process of making suggestions to the ordinance. It seems to me outside of this process, and it happens either through the ethics ordinance itself, or it's just an administrative issue about making it clearer about how that process works and laying it out on the website.
Thank you. Thank you, Marie. Randy, can you respond, please?
Yes, this is Randy Larkin, Deputy City Attorney. In the past, those types of complaints have been filed with the city manager or with the mayor, and then they have been assigned out for an investigation or that type of deal. But we have not ever had a written policy, but I could tell you that one is in the works currently. The new city manager has indicated that he would like some type of policy establishing how these types of ethics complaints are investigated, or how they're received, how they're signed out for investigation, and then, regarding whether it's a complaint against the city manager or city commissioner or an advisory board member. So we're in the process of working through that right now.
Sure, and that should be available and accessible on the website too, right? Yeah.
Once it's completed, Maria Garcia, I think, is perhaps working on it or just getting started on it, but I know that's in the works.
Okay, very good. Marie?
Board Member Marie Taylor, in the city I used to live in, they were handled through the city attorney's office. And so if you had a complaint, you would file it to the city attorney's office. And I don't know if that makes any difference in terms of like avoiding conflict of interest, to say if there's a complaint against the city manager, but all the complaints are going to the city manager.
Right.
I don't know if that's also part of what you'll be working out in the process. So
hopefully that'll be spelled out. I mean, in fact, personally, I've handled a couple of the investigations of some ethics complaints in the past. So that's how they've been signed out, either through our department, but those came to us through the city manager's office and assigned them to us. So.
Is there a question on that? Is there a city ombudsman?
There is not. There is not currently. No, we had an auditor, but his role was, he wasn't even an ombudsman. He was an auditor, but he was an auditor in the broadest sense of the word, and that he would determine whether or not we were handling cash properly, or we were doing things in the best possible manner. But he didn't oversee books or do anything like that. So there is no city ombudsman.
Okay. Marie?
Board Member Marie Taylor. And so Randy, can you just tell us more about like the time frame? What's a reasonable time frame that you work through these complaints, these ethics complaints? And it's in that information, I'm assuming, will be part of the process, the laying out the process and the website.
Like anything else, it depends on the nature of the complaint. I've known some of these to take several months. One of the longest one I worked on took me several months, because there was just a number of witnesses and people that had to be interviewed, and arranging schedules, and at the same time doing regular work for myself as well. So that was the longest. Some of them have taken as short as a week, depending on what it was, 3 days, 4 days, something like that. So it just depends on the complaint and the nature of it, and how many witnesses there are, and whether or not, it's contested. So you have to fight through whether or not, who's telling the truth here, or that type of deal, or make an assessment as to credibility and those things. It sometimes can be difficult.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we were finishing up section 2512. Any questions there? Then moving on to section 3, 4, and past. I think we're done here. All right, good work, everyone. Okay, so next steps will be to do the final clean. Okay, and I see a hand up, Marie. Oh, is that a clap? Oh, I see some motion there, some motion lines, yes. Okay, very good. All right, everybody good? Oh, I see lots of them now, yay. Very good. All right, so let's move on to item number 3 then for the evening, and that's the election of chair and vice chair positions.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
if I may, Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire, I would advise that we get clear direction on next steps for the ordinance in the form of a motion and vote.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
Sorry to be the task manager.
That's fine, thank you. Okay, so is there a motion? Jane?
I'm not sure that we need a motion and a vote at this point, but clear direction would certainly be advisable. We still have one more round to read the last changes that Randy and Tony and any other staff members working on it will make. And then I think there's room after we have that clean draft with all these changes on it and we're read, then we can have a motion and a vote. But it seems to me premature to have that now, unless you just need a motion and a vote to say, you know, go forward and make more changes or something.
Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. Yes, Board Member Gibson, that would be my recommendation, is that a motion to the effect of direct staff to incorporate the revisions as discussed by the board and return at the November 12th meeting for further discussion.
I'll make that motion then.
Thank you, Jane. Second? Sanjay, seconding? Okay. All those in favor with yay, all opposed nay. Sanjay?
Yes.
Marie?
Yes.
Ginny?
Yay.
Jane?
Yes.
Stephanie?
Yes.
And Tanya, yes. So we've got 6. The motion passes. Thank you all. And we look forward to that November 12th. Okay, anything else, Brandon?
No, that will do. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And then I'm going to guess after the final read, then we'll engage in a plan on the community engagement move and movements there. And so let's go to number 3 then, election and chair and vice chair positions. Okay. Any motions on the floor? Jane?
I move that Tanya and Stephanie continue as chair and vice chair of the CPRB for another year.
There's a motion? Second? A second? Hey, Sanjay?
I can second it.
Okay, so we'll move through yays and nays. Okay, so Sanjay?
Yes.
Marie?
Yes.
Ginny?
Yes.
Jane?
Yes.
Stephanie?
No. No, I'll say yes. I'm just giving y'all a hard time.
You don't want to be vice chair?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, this is, I will agree to it, but I'm going to lean very, very much on the vice chair, and we would like to really think about spreading the love with regard to, and this is what I will talk about at some point, and I'd like to start off the next meeting that way. Well, wait, let me finish the motion here in the voting. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Motion carries with 6 yays. So go ahead.
Wait,
yes.
Did you vote?
I did.
Okay.
I had a very little Y. Okay. I would like to, in this next term, then really spread out responsibilities among us, because I know we are volunteers and we all have a lot of load. And I want to apologize for missing the last meeting. I know with COVID certainly, but some of us do, and myself, I do have a commitment to some personal caregiving of an older family member that may interrupt my life at at any time or all the time. So, I'm glad to continue doing this. But I do believe that going to and talking about at our next meeting, a method in which we can spread some of the load and responsibilities going forward, putting a plan together based on getting the ordinance, doing a quick review and making sure that bylaws are aligned with the ordinance is what I would like to see us do in the next, in the next year, increase that community engagement and put a more concrete plan in place. So that's really what I wanted to mention to you all, and thank you all for your confidence in me. Stephanie?
Yeah, this board member, Stephanie Littleton. Yeah, thank you all. I really want to kind of piggyback to what Tanya is sharing, and we have a lot, as we all know, going forward. We have a lot ahead of us, and I'm excited about the community subcommittee engagement. But we really are going to need to work together. And I think I have had some thoughts here of late with so much that we've been trying to tackle that, and we're all trying to come at these agendas, trying to get everything in. And I don't want to violate COMA or anything, but I kind of want to throw out a recommendation that really kind of work together here as to making the most efficient, effective meetings that we can have. And by that meaning, let's be thoughtful of one another about what we bring together on the agendas, making the most effective and efficient, of our time. So with that, I don't know how I really want to put that, but I think we really need to think about when we're, if we're getting, I don't know if there's proper protocol that it comes to us or if it goes to Randy, but I just want to make sure we're aware of, what we're submitting and how, what we're putting out there, so we don't overreach ourselves on each meeting that we have too much. So just wanted to kind of throw some thought out on that. But yeah, thank you for all of your support. And I personally am going to reach out as well, looking at different members here to assist in doing some presentations. So
very good. Yeah.
All in advance.
I'm so proud of us moving through this ordinance in the amount of time that we have had, by the way, since we typically meet quarterly, and the fact that we've all committed to this increased number of meetings and the frequency of meetings, and your dedication and commitment to it is incredible. And so I really want to recognize that and thank you all for all of your good work putting it into this. That last meeting that we went through the ordinance and returning it to it today, I saw some really great movement in us as a cohesive group, and I really I stood back and really felt really good about our collective commitment to this and our engagement. I just wanted to share that. Sanjay?
Thank you, both Tanya and Stephanie, for being the leaders of this group. On a different topic, if we are ready to move, can we get some update on the consultant? Because we were made to believe that the timeline for the consultant is going to be very short, because we had requested an increase in membership
from 7 to 9. The city commission told us, wait, and we will do it quickly because this consultant will come in and finish their work quickly. And is it true that it's going to be June of 2021 before they're finished?
Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. Yes, that is the timeline for the consultant study.
So that brings up a good question, Sanjay, because I think under the impression that that the city commission wanted to table that issue, not based on the recommendations from the consultants, but rather perhaps the work that we're doing on the ordinance and maybe even on the bylaws. Am I confusing that, Sanjay?
So Tanya, Sanjay Mishra, the board member, I hope you are right. Because the way I understood it was, wait, this person is going to tell us how to handle our police department and things here, there, everywhere. And so then we will roll our board membership based on that. But if it is based on our work, we are ready.
So then I have a technical question to Randy. Randy, is there a place in the ordinance that we need to make the recommendation that we increase our board from, 7 to 9 members?
I believe in the membership paragraph, it does strike out 7 and put in the number 9. And
Okay,
if the city commission approves that, that will increase the number to 9.
Yeah, we do have it in there, Tanya.
Okay, I just wanted to double check because I guess I was thinking that because we put it in here, that the way it will get approved then is by the city commission. Stephanie?
Board Member Mr. Pendleton. I think, Sanjay, what you're recalling is the city commission really wants for us to engage with the consultant. And that was one piece of the pie besides us working on this ordinance. And, we just need to keep moving forward. Granted, it's going to take a little bit longer, and November 12th, city staff come back to us and we may be ready, another meeting or two after that. But, hopefully we don't have to wait, until we really do engage with them. I don't know what time frame that looks like, but we're just going to need to keep moving forward and see what we can get done.
And I wanted to add one more thing. I'm not sure that there was a very, very specific expectation that the city commission had with regard to our role and the consultant. But I think we, if I'm not mistaken, and I think particularly Jane, pushed the envelope to make sure that we were a part of the selection committee. And I think that's where part of our, at least the growing commitment that we had to be a part of this process started, if I'm not mistaken. And so I'm not sure really what our role is going to be in the process of the data gathering and the assessment. I'm going to guess that we will be involved, but I'm not sure specifically how. Brandon, do you have an idea about that?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. And I want to circle back around to the concerns of Board Member Mishra and kind of piggyback or elaborate on Vice Chair Littleton's comments. The motion from the commission, when the City Commission received the board's recommendation to expand the membership, included three specific requests. One was to work with city staff. The second was to engage the community members, and the third was to engage with the consultant through the consultant study. And so we had discussed when reviewing the RFP for the consultant selection process concerns of the board members about that consultant piece. And so I think that's a good segue into conversation about what the board can expect in terms, at least especially early on in the consultant study process. And so the consultant team will meet, and all meetings are going to be virtual. We're not going to bring them here, unfortunately, but that's the circumstances we're in. So we're going to meet, organize meetings with the consultant team, and they will be meeting with members of the City Commission, with every member of the City Commission and every member of this board. And those will be some of the first meetings that they have. In addition to that, we're also going to organize meetings between the consultants and leadership of the city organization, of the police department. And so they're going to be working through a couple different layers of interviews. And that will help them expand their scope of interviews, identify additional community members and community groups that they need to reach out to. And so really we're kind of building on the very broad public engagement process that we used for the City Commission strategic plan, in which we engaged with dozens and dozens of groups. I believe it was more than 100 hours of public engagement meetings that we had informing that process. And so we will be organizing these interviews with each of you, and most likely we'll try to do that in groups of 2 or 3. We obviously will keep those, we'll adhere to the Kansas Open Meetings Act for those interviews, and they won't be public meetings, they'll be private interviews. We want you to be able to speak openly and freely with the consultants based on your experiences and your insights. So those, we'll be communicating with each of you to organize those meetings here probably as soon as next week to start organizing those and get those on your calendars.
Okay, very good. Sanjay?
Board Member Sanjay Mishra. So, Brandon, I don't want to belabor it, but what is your understanding? Should we make our request for 9 now, or should we wait?
Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. One of the other pieces of feedback from the commission I forgot to mention was that they wanted a comprehensive ordinance, not a. I think the term was piecemeal that was used. So and their advice was, prior to forwarding a comprehensive ordinance, work with city staff and work with the public, engage the public, and then engage the consultant. And so I think we can talk with the consultant about early on what a review of the ordinance in its current draft form or eventual draft form would look like. And I think the consultant would probably be, I don't want to speak on their behalf, but they work, they're under contract with us, so we have some influence with them, and we can request that they conduct a review of the ordinance and provide comments back to the board if that would be, if the board members find that appropriate to do, and we can have that discussion early on in the process. This is a very comprehensive study. I know you all have seen the scope of work, and so there will be different deliverables, different pieces that come earlier than others, and we can certainly prioritize this. And in fact, we've been thinking in those terms that we'll prioritize the discussions with the Community Police Review Board in order to help expedite this ordinance review process.
And I'm sorry, Brandon, this is Chair Salvini. I'm not sure I caught when they were going to begin.
Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire, they're going to begin just as soon as the ink is dried on the paper, on the contract. So they are very excited to get started. It was a long discussion at the City Commission meeting last night, leading up to the approval of the contract. City staff has met with the consultant over a number of hours and a few different days through our clarification process to just make sure we really understand each other about the expectations of the study and the deliverables. And then prior to that, obviously, they went through a very extensive and rigorous selection process. So they've already, through this whole selection process, certainly this consultant and the other consultants have been doing their own data gathering already. And the selection process really was designed to be engaging and get them some exposure and start to build some connections to the community so that they could hit the ground running. And I think that we were successful to some extent in being able to do that through the selection process. So they're ready to go, and so are we.
Okay, very good. Marie?
Maria Taylor, board member. On my list of priorities would be for the consultants to offer recommendations for the complaint system that the police use, and less so for them giving us comments on the draft ordinance that we're working on. I don't know if they can change our minds at this point, but yes, because to me, the consultant's role wouldn't be to review our work.
Right. Okay, and I think the feedback from them is could be helpful, but I don't see it as a priority as well. I see the feedback from the community as a priority. So I'm thinking at our next meeting we'll talk about a timeline, because the next piece is, while the ordinance is being polished, we'll want to design that timeline in terms of getting feedback, putting it out there and getting feedback from the community So we can set a date potentially that we can then finally vote on the ordinance, the final vote. And if there are any, after we take it out for community engagement, if there are any reconsiderations, polish that up and then get it before the city commission. Okay. Is that, am I thinking accurately? And I missed a little bit and I didn't get through all of the tape from the last meeting. Jane?
I just want to endorse what you're saying. Yes.
Okay.
That is, we've got the ordinance. We don't need the consultant to speak to the ordinance. We do need the public input, and then we need to go to the commission.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. I might just add to the discussion that the consultant is going to be engaging groups who may be difficult to reach, groups that are represent marginalized members of our community, who are very much affected by police-race relations, and so that, I guess that's all I would offer, maybe from how the City Commission is thinking about this ordinance, and the board's work on this ordinance, that the insights that they gain from these meetings or these interviews, as well as survey work that they're going to be doing and other forms of public engagement, could inform the board's work on the ordinance, or it could be at least useful in augmenting your own public engagement efforts.
Indeed, I agree, and we'll be open to that process for sure. Thank you, Brandon. Well, I hope I'm speaking on behalf of all of you. Okay, all right, very good. Okay, any other discussions for the evening? And again, I want to thank Brandon and Randy and Terry and the staff and certainly Lieutenant Ernst and Captain McKinley for all of your willingness to engage as you are throughout this year and in our months to come for sure. Stephanie?
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut into you. That was good feed. This is a board member, Stephanie Littleton. I just wanted to maybe kind of put a plug in, so to speak, to Brandon. And I hear two things that are really pretty important for our board and the citizens. And that is, one is to get the consultant's input on the complaint review process and data collection. Very important, in addition to our ordinance, which, you make very good point, Brandon, that information can be conveyed out, through their work. So wherever we can get placed earlier into that process, obviously more important for all of us. So I'm just putting that my 2 cents out there, I guess. But Brandy, I want to thank you and Tony and the rest of the city staff as well for all your help. It's been great partnering with you. So thank you.
Lieutenant David Ernst, I wanted to...
Like it's over, but I hope it's not. Yes. I'm sorry, Brandon.
Lieutenant David Ernst, I just have a couple items to add and relevant to the recent conversations. One, data collection and software system. I mentioned that we are looking at acquiring one. That is going to be presented to the command staff on October 26th. I think that's a Monday. And so that is moving forward. So I wanted to put that out there. And number 2, Stephanie, you had made mention of the summaries. That report's almost done. And it will be presented, I would assume, in some shape or form on the November 12th meeting. And that's going to be a summaries of the citizen-generated personnel investigations.
Board Member Stephanie Littleton, that's fantastic. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments or motions?
Madam.
I'd like to motion to adjourn.
Madam Chair.
Oh, yes, Brandon.
Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. Sorry to delay your adjournment, but I do want to point out that the calendar, the board is scheduled out to meet through the next meeting, and there are no more meetings on the calendar. And so we really need to have serious discussion at some point very soon about the future meetings of this group, and especially in this format where we are limited on our ability to be able to broadcast these meetings. So if the board is willing, we could have some discussion this evening, or we could table that and have it at the next meeting. But we do need to start working on the future calendar.
Okay, Jane?
I'd like to second Jenny's very fine motion and suggest that we table the discussion of future meeting dates to the next meeting.
And let's put it at the top of the agenda, if that's okay. We'll start with that. Are there other agenda items real quickly while we're on discussion before we vote? Marie?
Marie Taylor, board member. So can we do like a doodle poll because part of what's hard to schedule meetings is the availability of the space that Brandon's in to broadcast, right? So that kind of dictates what our options are. So maybe a doodle poll, at least to have a sense of what days would work. And then when we have our next meeting, we'll know what days are in play. And then we can decide from there.
Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. Yes, I will work with Bobby Walthall in our office, and you'll hear from her before the next meeting with dates that work. Although I would encourage, and I know we've had this discussion briefly before, but I would encourage the board to move towards a consistent schedule to the extent possible. And I know that's challenging to do, but I think that at least in my experience, when we are trying to encourage engagement with our community members through these board meetings, that is helpful to know that on a certain, the third Thursday of the month, every month at 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock or 7 o'clock at City Hall, I can go and engage with the Community Police Review Board. That I do think that there are merits to doing it that way, but obviously I understand that you are all very committed in your professional lives. So.
Good.
Sure. And here, I just real quickly, but what has prompted all of this, and this is I need to polish up my review and my recommendations to everyone, but my opening paragraph draft, which I sent you, Brandon, by the way, is coronavirus, racial injustice, community injustice, death, police violence, protests, and more. Here we are. Lots of discussion, especially in June, prompted by the death of George Floyd by police officers. We reviewed and we received, with recommendations from the mayor of Lawrence and the support of the Human Relations Commission, that really drove the kind of schedule that we've had. So I take your point in getting back into a rhythm that's a little more consistent, where we can be a little more reliable, not only to each other, but to the public as well. Stephanie.
Board member Stephanie Wilson, I would recommend or suggest, I guess, the third Wednesday of every month, because Thursday nights are football. So that's my 2 cents. What can I say?
All right.
And I think for consistency's sake, I do think that's a great idea that we, so the Tuesday or Wednesday.
Sanjay?
I agree. I second that proposal. If it's a consistent date, it works.
More like second that emotion right now, because we're in the middle of a motion.
Double motion, but this is more for Brandon to explore. If the Wednesday works.
All right.
And we will be getting by email about it. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Jane?
I'm calling the question.
I don't blame you. Let's all vote. Yay for the motion that was presented by Ginny and seconded by Sanjay. Okay. All those in favor? That would be Sanjay. Yay. Marie?
Yes.
Jenny? Yep.
Yeah. Sorry.
Jane?
Yes.
Stephanie?
Yes.
Tanya, yes. It's unanimous. We got 6 votes there. So thank you all again. for the lovely meeting and the lovely work that everyone's done. So looking forward to November 12th.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.